Hello, I'm Toycat, and welcome back to the A to Z of geography. And can you guess the most populated country for the letter K? I bet you can't, because it's a country which soon might not exist, and unlike many other countries which might not exist for negative reasons of their neighbors, entirely consuming them or invading them, Kenya has a very positive future in that it might not exist because it's likely to merge with its neighbors. The East African Federation is something that has come up before on this channel. Here are the your member states right now. Here are the potential future members, but this is going to be one of the biggest countries in the region, and it's something which has been moved towards. Unlike most other proposed states, it's not just an idea that could happen, some vague notion of being together, but instead they have plans to actually integrate their customs market, indeed their monetary unit. They actually want to slowly move together and become a nation. They say it's been fast-tracked, although that was in May 2017. It's something that continuously is on the progress of happening, and regardless of what comes from it, regardless of whether you believe their website or not, they are getting closer and closer and standardizing things amongst these 7 East African nations, which is something to be proud of, I think. However, today we'll be talking about Kenya in particular, as it is the big economic engine of a future, like an East African Federation. What is the deal with Kenya? What's the deal with its borders? It looks like it doesn't have any border disputes, except maybe that one. What's the deal with that? How is Kenya divided? What's the future of Kenya like? Let's answer all of those questions and more as we dive into the East African nation today. So, fun fact, by the way, first of all, is the fact that, this is the first time we have a situation where one of the countries from this series borders another one, and that's really fun, because we'll be talking about the same border twice if we're not careful. But interesting enough, because Kenya has a history of being maybe drawn up by colonial states, it has these straight line borders that everyone hates in various ways, and interestingly enough, these are straight line borders across actual population areas. For the most part, there is, not really settled areas, until there is, when you see right here that it actually, as it slowly cuts across and has to work around natural features and where people live. You find something much more interesting though on this second straight line between Kenya and Tanzania, the 2 biggest countries in the region and the future federation besides Dr. Congo. But and interesting enough, you can see that when you look at these 2 countries, they have a straight line border between them, and interestingly enough, at all of the major crossings, you'll find that there are towns which are cut in half by this border. Half of this town is in Kenya, half is in Tanzania. That's interesting enough by itself, given how loosely populated the whole place is, but you'll notice that it happens again over here. And then if you look, not over there apparently, you'll notice that it happens another time over here with a huge number of people on both sides, and then finally it happens another time over here in Isibanya. Absolutely fascinating to me that there can be this situation where the border is very much an arbitrary line for a lot of people, but yet it does somehow hold, and this might be one of the big reasons why you'd want to integrate with your neighbors and friends. At some point this was all ruled as one great land, and managing to separate it makes you maybe want to put it back together. Although, interestingly enough, when you look at the borders with Uganda and over here, you can notice that Kenya gets the very short end of the stick when it comes to Lake Victoria. This is one of the big lakes of Africa, and which I think is a massive understatement, by the way. But the interesting thing is to say that when you look at Kenya and Uganda, you can see their border is very much a squiggly one, which follows rivers. But I love when you look closer, you'll realize that they vaguely followed the river with their border, but also not kind of. Officially speaking, the river is not the border, this is the border instead, and so it's just a bunch of straight lines between various points that represent the river, and I think that's incredibly interesting personally. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't, but ultimately, when you follow these borders, you'll notice there's only one which gets really notable, because when it comes to Kenya and Ethiopia's border, I mentioned that they have a real hard time policing it, because there's just nomadic people who exist outside of any real nation state. They might be officially citizens of one country or another, but they move around from time to time to settle on new lands, and this causes issues for the idea of a border, and this also causes issues with Sudan, and so Sudan, Ethiopia, and Kenya don't really have a firm agreement on what they should do about these people on their borders, and so as a result, they also haven't really firmed up their borders. Ethiopia and Kenya came to agreement, and Ethiopia and Sudan came to an agreement, but which South Sudan was obviously later split apart from. But there's an interesting third play to this, which is that Ethiopia at one point claimed this area right here. After they firmed up their border with Sudan, it looks as though they don't claim this area, and Sudan and Kenya therefore don't disagree that this area should probably be like this. There's a bunch of different ways you could draw the border, but ultimately they all agreed that like, yeah, okay, then although there are nomadic peoples, and although sometimes they put some men with guns on the border to stop those people crossing over, ultimately Kenya thinks this is their land, and South Sudan just about agrees. And so the only reason they haven't come around to agreeing on the border is because they just haven't gotten around to it. It's going to be very peaceful, and please ignore those resources, which, oh no, do we find some oil there maybe? Is there some potential for some resources to be found? Well, I guess we can draw out this border dispute just a little bit longer. Ultimately, this is why fixing border disputes while times are good is a good idea. The only reason I can find as to why they didn't fix it before the resource discovery is because neither party really cared too much. But now that there is oil, both parties care a lot, and it would have been a better idea to work it out before a lot of money could have been made, in my humble opinion. But yeah, that is the border situation of Kenya. They also do, of course, border Somalia, and this border is interesting because it looks like it's a straight line through a desert. However, when you take a closer look, you can see there's actually some population centers around some of these sharp angles. I think that's fascinating personally. Look at this right here. There is a town on each side of this. It is a very, very strange, and again, looking at it, you can see it would be near impossible to police this border between the countries, and yet somehow it exists regardless. Absolutely fascinating in my opinion. Speaking of things that are fascinating, let's finally go into the subdivisions of Kenya. Kenya is incredibly interesting because it used to be divided into provinces. I'll show you that map right now if you want to. However, they then decided to switch the name of their subdivisions and make way more, as this is the 47 counties of Kenya. Fun fact, it's like prefectures of Japan, the exact same number if you will. And yeah, also if you look at the population, you can probably tell that something around here is probably where more people live. And looking at this fun map, I don't know why I love these spiky maps sometimes, you can see that indeed all of Kenya's population is found along a narrow strip right here, and then a gap, and then a narrow strip along there. And taking a look at the population of the country, yep, that just about tracks of the green land on Google Maps. However, this then means that the capital of Kenya is not along the coast, which is, if I was to guess where the best place to put a capital city for a big country like this is, the port usually seems like it'd be that. But although Mombasa is a very big city, an absolutely fascinating city geographically speaking too, look at this, it's like an island, but not a true island, because it's got a tiny, like, it's sort of a peninsula, but still you can see like there is an island right over here, and it's between 3 other major bits. This looks really cool. This is, if they had, like, I feel like this is as iconic as Vancouver, it's just less known about because it's a second tier city in Kenya, but still absolutely fascinating in my opinion. Nairobi is the capital though, and this is where most of the largest number of the people live. Every time I've met someone who's from Kenya, they're like, yep, from Nairobi. And the cool thing about Nairobi is it shows one of the, like I guess when you're talking about political issues, you can't deny the fact that within Africa, the GDP per capita are generally poor. Kenya is not a poor African nation, but despite that, its GDP per capita is not that far above the poorest country in the Americas, Haiti, like I mentioned. And so when you compare that, like, well, Kenya is like on that level, it must be doing poorly, it's actually not. For an African nation, it's doing very, very well. But it does so in a very divided way. Even though Kenya has fewer people than Tanzania, it has a higher per person per capita rate, but also one of the worst wealth inequalities on the continent. And so this leads to an interesting city where Nairobi, which again, on average, people, $2,000 per capita is the GDP here. You can see that there are huge stadiums, which is interesting. You can see that there are so many shopping centers. Like, follow this this highway that goes between the airport and the center of the city, and you'll see like, okay, there is a shopping mall. There is a shopping mall. Are there any other shopping malls? I bet there's not. Oh, the Next Gen Mall over there, and the Capital Center, and look, there is a lot of wealth and things like that. Is that a Carrefour Mega? That's fun. There's a Mega, a hypermarket if you want to see one. There are all of the signs of wealth that you can find in a place, and indeed, there is this giant expressway which might hint at that too. Looking along it, by the way, I can't help but be curious, because if you look along this, you can see like, oh yeah, so one, looks like there's no lanes on this thing, just maybe working out yourself is a tiny bit scary. But two, if you take a closer look anywhere else, you'll see that they clearly had issues with people like crossing over the thing, because I apparently picked the wrong section to show this. They clearly had issues with people jumping over the thing, because if you look over here, you can see like, oh, they've got huge barriers between various sections of this. Were there enough people willing to cross 4 separate roads of lanes of road to go somewhere? Apparently so, or like 4 separate sets of lanes. I think it's interesting. What I also think is interesting is this KFC over there. You know, I feel like the true sign of wealth inequality is the KFC on the side of the highway, right? Actually, wait. I want to see the KFC, not this truck, damn it. There we go. Look at the KFC. That is a really good location, too. Literally off the side of the highway. All you got to do is pull off left, and you're in. Sounds real good. Also, is that truck okay? Speaking of things that don't seem okay, I think this is looking around anything in the country. I'm sure you'll get the exact point I'm talking about. We'll just hop onto a random spot right there. So let's actually go up high. Let's go to a random spot. And you'll get either a big view that like, oh yeah, this is like a wealthy nation. Look at this. This is upper middle income. And then if you pick the wrong spot in the nation, I'm assuming we're going to find one right now. If we pick the wrong spot, I'm trying to pick a random spot, but Google won't let me. Then you might get the exact opposite view. Okay, over here. No, I can't look at anything. There we go. Wow. It proved my point for me. Usually, whenever you try to do a random thing like this, you don't. But look at this. This is the exact opposite. This looks like one of the poorest nations you've seen, of cars that are beaten up and, like you get an interesting view of the fact that, yes, like any country, there are two, reams of society. I think a lot of people try to pretend that there is no such thing as wealth inequality in the dream country. However, the fact that it is so extreme might be a barrier to future development, and maybe that's something that could be worked on. But I think what's much more interesting is looking at the population pyramid. Oh, ho, ho. Wow, that's quite the pyramid, huh? They take the phrase population pyramid very literally in Kenya. Again, something about the fact that even though they are growing in income, it is still a lower middle income, if you're really stretching things, and a poor nation by most standards, means that the birth rates are incredibly high in this African nation, and that means the population growth is also incredible. In 1950, their population was just 5, this would have been a tiny European nation, and by the year 2100, this will be a country almost as big as Japan is today, and much bigger than Japan will be then. This is the sign that if you just get to the the population growth game late, you can have huge numbers of people. And indeed, Kenya is a ridiculously fast-growing country on basically every metric. If you want to, when people look around, Africa, and they generalize the whole thing together as being like, oh yeah, well it's poor, it's corrupt. Kenya is definitely the exception to that in many ways. And if we you don't take my word for it, take the British travel advice's word. So as long as you don't go near the border of Somalia, which advise all against essential travel, you can go to Kenya just fine. And I think diving a little bit more into it, they do say watch out for all of these counties, and they say obviously read the advice if you're a woman. Disabled people? That's a new one. Watch out for disabled people, watch out for women, watch out for LGBTQ plus people. Obviously, important thing to do, but otherwise everything's entirely fine. I mean, obviously, we dive into safety a little bit, and there is a high threat of terror attack globally, but that's kind of normal. Terrorists are very likely to try and carry out attacks in Kenya. That's fine. Just don't go to any of these places. Obviously, when you're going to another country, it's rare you'll go to any of those places anyway. And also, watch out, because there was an attack in 2020, and there was an attack in 2019. But, during the pandemic, they stopped, and so presumably, if we just assume the terrorists all caught COVID, you should be safe to go, although you might be kidnapped. So, if you don't mind a little kidnapping, you don't mind spending a little bit of time in someone's basement, then yeah, Kenya sounds good. But more seriously, it is this is something to watch out for. With any country of that level, is traveling is going to be expensive and more dangerous than you might expect. But also, when you hear that, like, oh yeah, there was an attack in 2020 and people might be kidnapped, statistically won't happen to you. You're probably going to be more than fine. And if you want to go somewhere where they drive on the left and where they use counties as the system of government, then this is the place for you. This is, Nairobi in particular, is a very, 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 it's the closest you're going to get to a fancy city in East Africa. And if you want to experience that, I really can't get over this. This looks like it could be in, I don't know, Miami or something, right? Like, maybe not Miami. I feel like one of the border towns in Texas. You could believe it. At least in my opinion. Maybe not. Maybe you disagree with that. But yeah, I think that is the thing to keep in mind with Kenya. I also think the other thing to keep in mind with Kenya is that it is probably, even though I mentioned the East African Federation, it is probably the most obstructionist member to actually joining that country. Is my microphone working? Yeah, it is. But it's probably the most obstructionist member in saying they want to join and going through it all, but not really working in all the integration. It's like Sweden and the Euro. It's like, yeah, we're gonna say we want to be in there, but like, do we really want to? It's a lot easier, you know, like, if you want to say you don't want to be a part of something, it's really awkward. People confront you, they're like, oh, what do you mean you're not going to go there? If you say you're going and then just don't, it's really hard for them to say why. You're going to be like, no, I really want to go there. I'm working on it right now. Fun fact, there's advice for getting out of your life's problems. Be a Kenya. And speaking of Kenya, yeah, it is one of the most beautiful countries for the natural wildlife. That should go without saying. When you look at a population density map like this, you know that the rest of the country is going to be beautiful, and indeed it is. But the fact that it can have a decent city, indeed multiple decent cities, I've heard about Mombasa, while also having these crazy beautiful national parks. Let's pick a random point on one of these, shall we? These are going to be roads, actually, so this is going to be terrible. They can have national parks like this. It's kind of fun, right? And if you don't think it's fun, then I hope you'll enjoy this one anyway. And make sure that if you want to have some fun, indeed, if you know anyone who is Kenyan or has looked at Kenya on a map or has eaten food in their life, make sure to recommend that this Christmas they get their hands on a 12-in-1 Ninja Speedy Rapid Cooker and Air Fryer, 6-quart capacity, 12-in-1, functions to steam, bake, roast, sear, saute. You want to make sure that you get your hands on one of these. Seriously, if you are moving out for the first time, or maybe you've got like an appliance that's dead, my microwave broke recently, you might enjoy getting your hands on something like this. I love the fact that it can do actual air frying, which is fun, as well as it's the best rice cooker I've ever owned. Maybe, you know, and bear in mind, I'm a quarter Asian, so that's saying something. And then also it does all of these other things, one-touch meals in 15 minutes. I don't know about that claim, but what I can say is it does so many things. It's sous vide things, it dehydrates things. The fact that it can do all of those things and it costs the same as one appliance, it's 12-in-1. You need to get your hands on one. Check the link in the description because this is the one gift that everyone needs this Christmas, and get yourself the gift of better cooking. Thank you for watching this second channel video. I hope you all enjoyed it, and Kenya